And I feel like I watch that play out all the time where people are just naturally overconfident in their abilities. And probably that's because we're working with a lot of very successful people who are very good at what they do. And they often translate that to all areas of life. I would argue that I'm good at my job, but not very good at anything else. I've learned from experience, but when you work with someone who's wildly successful, and you mentioned like we're as a species, we'll apply rules that work in one area incorrectly to another area. And so just their own trust in their own gut and their own confidence in knowing holistically everything, which is very difficult to identify those blind spots. And that's sort of the role that as an advisor, if we're looking there and listening like a therapist to help identify those blind spots, to help keep people honest. It doesn't just work with overconfidence, but it also works with people who are maybe more loss averse. The common thing that us in the profession throw around is that the pain of losses hurt twice as much as the pleasure of gains, right? And people don't like to make a lot of change. So if it's different, we get that fear reaction going on. How do you feel like that can play out with individuals, and how can they do things to address that conservatism that they face?
It's a great example. I think one of the most brilliant sort of business applications of a deep understanding of loss aversion happened during the great financial crisis. So during the GFC, everyone was scared of losing their job. Everyone was scared of pay cuts. And so big purchases really dried up. People are not going out and buying cars and houses when they think that their job's on the line at any day. And so Hyundai did this really neat thing that showed a deep understanding of sort of excessive conservatism and loss aversion, which is they said, look, if you buy a Hyundai, like if you buy a new Hyundai and you lose your job, we will refund you. No questions asked, right? Like you can undo this transaction within however many months it was. And so people, when you took sort of the worst case scenario off the table, people were then able to move forward. So they said, hey, I do need a new car. I hope I don't lose my job. But if I do, I can unwind this transaction. And so they sold like 4 times as many cars as their next biggest competitor for a period of time during the financial crisis. And so we as advisors and we as professionals can do something like this by taking advantage of this mental framework called mental accounting. So as a form of simplification, people tend to bucket their money. And because they do this, we know that money's fungible, right? Like the same money that I could use to go buy a Snickers bar, I could also apply towards a ticket to a Cardinals game, right? Like we know that money can go any old place it wants to, but we don't treat it that way. We put these labels on it, and because we label it one way or another, we tend to invest and spend and save it differently. So one of the things that we can do is just help people segment their financial lives mentally so that we say, hey, look, the average bear market is, however, 2 years long or something. And say, look, you've got 2 years of safety right here so that next time things hit the fan, you can go, okay, I'm covered. It's kind of like that Hyundai example. And so there's little things we can do, everything from, of course, having people in the appropriately conservative risk reward framework to really sort of carving out and segmenting a piece of their assets to say, these are earmarked for safety. Like these are earmarked for a rainy day. So that's covered and it's coming. Right? We can even inoculate people against this somewhat because, we know the stat that gets thrown around all the time because it's a great one. The average intra-year drawdown over the last 30 years is like 16.5%. And yet every time there's a 10 or 15% dip in the market like there is now, we have people acting like it's never happened before when it happens as regularly as your birthday. So I think everything from educating people to creating specific carve-outs for felt safety are ways that advisors can help people overcome this loss aversion.